Ladies and gentlemen, this Red Gamer Telecom video, we're going to be continuing our second part of the interview regarding Crytek and their discussion on the next generation of consoles. In the previous video, we of course discussed the performance of the CPU, we discussed compute and many other things besides. So in this one we're going to kick things off with the ESRAM. Yes, the ESRAM. If there's ever one thing that causes contention in terms of consoles, the ESRAM is definitely it. Just to bring us all onto the same page, although I'm pretty sure you could all recite it right now with me. The ESRAM, of course, is 32 megabytes of high bandwidth memory. Now, it causes a lot of contention because people argue all the time, is it enough memory? And obviously, of course, it's not the only memory in the Xbox One. There is the DDR3. But many people are asserting the fact that the ESRAM is just not enough fast memory, and DDR3 can't just take up the slack by itself. Of course, that has about 68 gigabytes per second, the DDR3, whereas it doesn't have 100% efficiency, so it's probably around the low 60 mark for the actual number of bandwidth. Anyway. Savat, who is of course the chap being interviewed, said, and I quote, "We put our most accessed render targets like the G buffer, graphics buffer targets into ESRAM. Writing to ESRAM yields a considerable speed up, while 32 megabytes may not be enough to use something like MSAA to the fullest." MSAA, of course, is a form of anti-aliasing. With smart memory management strategy, it is possible to deal with that. You see, the problem with the ESRAM, and this is my own personal research, I'm still trying to do some. I know I've been a bit slacking on it. Well, not really slacking, it's just that all developers are weighing in on their own opinion. I've heard everything from it is going to be the doom of the console, which I don't think is a realistic explanation, because let's just face it, that it's never that black and white, right? They wouldn't have chosen it if it was that terrible. And besides, you wouldn't get titles like, say, Ryse working on the system either. All the way down to it's not going to make a blind bit of difference, it will be fine. I personally believe at this point it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. I have a feeling that it's going to require a lot more memory management than, let's say, the GDDR5. Now, the GDDR5 memory is, of course, pretty much brain dead. That's not an insult to the developers who are utilizing it for the PlayStation 4. It's just to say it doesn't really require smart memory management. That is not besmirching their ability, that is just a simple fact. It doesn't require so much memory management. That's not to say that you can just utilize it. It is not an endless nirvana, right? You are still in a desert surrounded by a finite amount of water. Consider that memory. In other words, you are at a desert, and you need to conserve your memory, water in this case, because you know that there's going to be help coming, but you need to survive 3 to 4 days before they can get there. You've only got a finite amount of water, so you can't just drink and guzzle all that sucker away, because otherwise you're going to die in, maybe about a day or so, because you're in the desert of dehydration. In which case, you still need to manage the water pretty carefully. Now, the PlayStation 4 has 176 gigabytes of memory, and the exact amount of memory, well, that's, and once again, another cause of contention, but most people would agree it's between 5.5 to 6 gigs. Obviously, it does have that flexible memory in place. The Xbox One, on the other hand, does have the ESRAM. Now, I'm going to be putting out a video on this probably tomorrow. Amata is back tonight, so I'm going to have a bit more time to myself, and also, fortunately, I've got the website finally moved. There's a few issues with it, but still, so I'll actually be able to give you guys some attention that you all deserve, rather than kind of these intermittent tech videos, which I can only profusely apologize for. But suffice to say, my initial findings are that it's somewhere going to be in the middle. I think that it's going to require great memory management. Now, fortunately, the language which most games are developed right now which is generally speaking a variant of C. It will either be C++ or C# or whatever. They've all got pretty good memory management anyway. It just means that there's going to be a lot more to it. It's not going to be such a simple process. I can't give you an exact quote on this right now, but it would also bear into the fact that developers have said when they've ported the game to the Xbox One, you've gotten a far worse frame rate than the PlayStation 4. My personal guess is that that's because, and this is a guess, this is not saying it's right, I haven't done enough research onto this yet, but from what I am gathering, and, you know, I reserve the right to change my opinion tomorrow, good sir, or good madam. My personal guess is that it's simply because the ESRAM is not being fully saturated or utilized correctly or fully or whatever, combination thereof, and therefore most of it is being rendered from a DDR3, which is not exactly conducive to high performance graphics. I'm sure many individuals will be painfully aware of the DDR3 performance of most graphics cards. Now, in other words, it is not an effective way to provide bandwidth to a GPU. Therefore, ESRAM is going to be a big deal. I'm going to give a lot more information on this in the next couple of days once I've done a bit more research, because I don't want to just say something to you guys without actually having some sources, because I don't think that's a constructive manner to deal with anything. I think it just kind of sucks, if I'm honest with you. So I'm hoping by tomorrow, possibly Tuesday, depending entirely on how fast I can basically put together the ruins that is my home. As some of you may be aware, I've had electricians round and they didn't exactly do nice things to my living arrangements. But hopefully the next day or two I'll be able to actually get the article out I've been trying to sort out for you guys, and I'll actually be able to give you guys some graphs and some jumping off points, and then hopefully we can get a better understanding on that. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the next point. Now I've just basically wasted 5 or 6 minutes of your time. Now let's discuss the Xbox One's audio processing system. It's actually very powerful, and we'll listen to Savat's quote first. Essentially, the hardware is performing calculations on audio data, handling the decode of audio that is encoded in XMA, Microsoft's proprietary designed for game audio, encode and decode compression algorithm. It takes weight off the main processing cores by utilizing this main optimization processor, which is approximately twice as powerful as the Xbox 360's, which means we can have higher voice counts. That is more sounds playing simultaneously. Also, it supports the 7.1 surround sound architecture, which is a vast improved 3D localization of sounds and the immersive audio environments we have created for in Ryse. Now, out of quote, to be fair, audio hardware has been somewhat stagnant in the industry, particularly on the PC. I'm going to hands up admit, despite the fact that I'm a PC gamer, the audio market on the PC has not been what I would consider to be bright and sprightly. Actually, I'd say it's been pretty much like an asthmatic slug that has been drenched in, let's go with bleach. It's not been too healthy. It's been pretty stagnant. Now, there are multiple reasons for this. Some would cite things such as DirectX, which certainly has played a role in that. The way that the sound stack, for example, on Windows has changed hasn't really been that conducive. But also, I think the developers have been really not that focused on it. Now, AMD, bless their little souls, are focusing upon the next generation of basically DSPs, digital signal processors, with the next generation Radeon cards. That would be the R9 290X cards. That is not the R9 280X. I just want to clarify that the 280X and below, there are a couple that you basically have to check. The ones basically utilizing the volcanic islands have the DSP. I think one of the R7s does, but the number slips my memory. Regardless, the premise here is that, as I said, sound quality has always been it's basically been software rendered for PC. What that basically means is that the CPU's handling a lot of the algorithms. Now, in terms of console, one can be forgiven for wondering how that actually affects consoles. Well, as regular viewers may know, the Xbox 360's audio was pretty decent. It did the job, but sorry guys, just caught my mic there. Sorry guys. So the audio system on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, to be fair, were pretty reasonable, such as they were, but they had a couple of issues. Primarily, that when the audio processor became extremely saturated, and this was particularly due to instances of a lot of surround sound. So let's assume that you have X amount of audio sources and you're dealing with surround sound structure. You've also got to remember that it is not just that is being processed. You also have to take into account audio compression and decompression when it comes to you chatting with your buddies on Xbox Live or PlayStation Network or whatever you happen to be using, and everything else besides. And so you have to also take into account that it is not just the audio track in a bunch of bullets that are playing. Oftentimes, if you hear audio, it's actually multiple sounds at once. I'm going to give you guys a very basic example, and this is by no means 100% technically accurate, but it's just to give you an idea. Let's assume that you shoot a bullet at, I don't know, let's say a car door, right? And let's say that the engine makes it so that car door is porous. In other words, the bullet doesn't just stop at that car door, it also goes through. And therefore it can also hit, let's say, a concrete block. And let's say that you're shooting your gun, right? So, your speakers are going pew, pew, pew with the bullets. Now, what happens? Is it just one audio source? No, the game has to take into account the sound of it shooting, right? The sound of obviously the bullets hitting whatever surface that you're standing on. So let's assume that it's, I don't know, say muddy ground, because obviously they have a certain sound. So you might hear the dull, fuddy, splashy sound of the bullets, the casing hitting the water. The bullet therefore hits and then goes through the car door, so that makes kind of a metallic-y sound. Then obviously you've got the thud of it hitting on concrete. I can't say that I've ever fired a gun, but I'm making a rough guesstimate. Obviously, some of you guys in the United States would probably be able to understand this considerably better than I could in terms of the audio of the weapons doing what I've described, but still I'm sure that you can use your imaginations. And therefore, it is not just a simple sound of pew. In other words, there are multiple audio cues that are playing. Now imagine that simultaneously on top of this, you've also got your character screaming, your comrades yelling, grenades going off, maybe a plane flying overhead with its own engines, and all of this is calculating positional audio. On top of this, you might have another 20-odd players also doing all of the same thing. And obviously a sound that is in a concrete room also needs to start to reverberate. And basically speaking, I'm just going to use the word, it does a lot of crap that's very complicated. And therefore, audio ray tracing and much more besides are becoming extremely expensive on processing time. And so the Xbox One's processor is pretty damn good. I'm going to be giving some information regarding the PS4's processor pretty soon as well. Anyway, moving on. So we've discussed the Move engines previously. In fact, they're one of actually my most watched video on the Xbox One versus PS4 series. They are known as the data move engines. Just to keep everyone apprised, they are of course a fixed function processor. To clarify, that basically means developers don't need to worry about them, they don't need to write specific code to address them. They basically just take care of their own little jobs, and their job is actually pretty cool. I've actually said repeatedly that I actually really like the addition of the data move engines in the Xbox. They help to basically shunt data around. Many would argue that their jobs can be achieved with, say, GPU memory management and other bits and bobs. The problem is with that it actually takes up cycles. So let's assume that you want to perform a memory operation, you want to move to A to B. The problem with that is that if the CPU is completely, utterly exhausted, in other words, there's no resources left, you have to wait for that memory move. So anyway, Savat said on this, Xbox One's move engines have proved to be quite useful to us accelerating streaming of texture data, etc. How well that fares overall compares to the powers of the PS4's compute engines remain to be seen, and likely depends on the specific type of game you want to build. Now that is a pretty honest answer, I'd agree. Obviously, compute engines, they can do a lot of these different memory calculations and so on compute. We did discuss this quite in depth yesterday. Obviously, you still need to queue things into compute, yeah? It's not like there are two separate processors dealing with this. So let's, it's not like you have two GPUs, one handling compute, one handling graphic data. In reality, it is one GPU, and despite the fact that the PlayStation 4 does have some modifications, such as, of course, the volatile bit, such as much better compute queues than the Xbox One, it is not the be-all and end-all. It is still requiring certain amounts of SP stream processors to be free so it can actually execute the code. I completely agree with Savant on this. I think that it's far too early to make any judgments on this. I do, however, think that it was a great inclusion on the Xbox One, but just how useful it's going to be overall, I think it's going to extremely depend upon the allocation of resources. I think it's going to depend on how much, for example, data is being moved at the same time, what you are building, what type of performance you're getting. Are you going to be more CPU bound on your game? Are you going to be more GPU bound? How much memory are you utilizing? What are you actually doing with that data? It's not, data isn't just data. It's a bit like saying to me, an object is just an object. In reality, it's not. I can hold a plastic bottle, I can hold a ton of lead. They're completely different things. In this case, it's very true. The way you split up memory and so on, split up resources inside memory, for example, texture allocation, build targets, render targets, even basic geometry all takes memory, so I think it's going to really depend on exactly what you're trying to do, what you're trying to compute. I do, however, think that it is a good addition. Anyway, now what about MSAA? Many will argue that MSAA is becoming less common. Now, MSAA, of course, is a pretty traditional form of anti-aliasing. It's quite expensive. I'll go into that in just a moment. But Savat said MSAA is quickly getting bandwidth bound and thus expensive, with a deferred shading-based renderer, and bandwidth consumptions is getting prohibitively high. For Ryse, we developed our own custom SMAA. In essence, it is a combo of morphological AA with smarter temporal anti-aliasing. It's a new and robust and fairly efficient technique, which we shared some details in a Sigograph in this year. It's a solution which deals with any signal input changes in order to smooth out any potential shimmering during movement while masking any potential ghosting, and together with shading aliasing solutions, it provides a more filmic image quality overall. Basically speaking, it has, and this is out of quote, it has massive implications when it comes to yield bandwidth. And the GPUs have gotten significantly better. Like, for example, back in the days of like the GeForce 1 and 2 and the Voodoo 4 and 5, which basically came out at the same time, FSAA, as it was known then, full scene anti-aliasing, was a very awesome technique, but not all games supported it. It was also extraordinarily expensive on GPU time. The GeForce cards actually sucked at it. 3D-FX actually had the much better full scene anti-aliasing. Of course, they went broke, unfortunately. And yes, there is a small tear coming from the corner of my eye when I say that. Oh god, the weather is terrible. Sorry guys, I forgot to mention, in the UK right now, we're actually expecting like 80-mile-an-hour plus winds, so yeah. Anyway, sorry, I got a bit distracted there. What was I saying? Ah yes, 3D-FX. So, yeah, back in the day, the GeForce range of cards was actually significantly worse at anti-aliasing, and despite the fact that there are always improvements, yeah, that it's never like it's the same thing. I think that overall consoles, I think it's going to be a case of developers needing to make their own decisions. It's going to really depend on what they feel is the budget remaining after they've done certain things. Obviously, some developers, for example, may want to go from 900p, from say 1080p to 900p and throw in some anti-aliasing, which can actually make certain games look better. The problem is, the media is crucifying them, as well as gamers crucify them, if they start dropping the resolution internally. That's a slightly different issue, but that's the problem. It's just public perceptions at the end of the day. But better and more efficient anti-aliasing techniques are obviously a great thing. Next, let's spend just a moment speaking about PC gaming. So, it's fair to say that PC gaming, previous generation, particularly early on, sucked for the ports, because they were basically a case of we got a version of the console version. So, in other words, the developers would pretty much work on the console versions and then they'd simply upscale the textures or whatever and give us a resolution option, and that was pretty much it for PC. Some games, of course, went the extra mile, such as, say, Oblivion, not Skyrim, Oblivion. We're talking like early 2007-ish kind of time, but suffice to say, it kind of sucked. But recently, it's been getting a lot better, and I think it's better to say now that certain games are actually being created first on PC, and then they're being downgraded to the consoles, and this is going to be the case on the next generation, according to Savant especially. Next-gen consoles provide excellent platform for any high-end PC developer. Naturally, in a few years from now, console developers are going to get more out of the next generation of consoles, and we should see a big jump with optimizations, providing even better console gaming experiences. The choice some developers are currently making to port from a PC to console is, in our opinion, has only happened because the development environment on PC is very stable. And building a launch title is very challenging due to the fact that the console itself is not finished until late in the process. That decision is not based on performance, but comfort. He also added, we definitely think that the new consoles generation will create a level up in PC gaming market for many other developers, and we've always been big advocates of PC gaming. Developers will all be able to maximize their investments because PC-like architectures of the consoles should see a great boost in quality for all multi-platform games that appear in the future. This has been pretty much the record for most developers. They've basically stated if they're creating a multi-platform game that a lot of developers, not all developers, but a lot of developers have said that they've been using the PC as pretty much a diving board and then changing things as required. It just so happens, from what I'm understanding, that the PC is pretty much smack bang in the middle between the PlayStation and the Xbox. So it's pretty easy for them just to branch off. So they basically create the assets on the PC, the very super high resolution, and then downscale as necessary. Which is pretty awesome in my personal opinion. It means that everyone gets the best version possible for their hardware. Unless, of course, you're going to make like an exclusive game. Obviously, if you are dealing with a game exclusively for one system, that's going to be like the best performance and visuals possible on that system at that time. I say at that time because obviously things are always improving, yeah? So you're always going to get better hardware for the PC, you're going to get better programming techniques, you're going to get better optimizations, and so on and so forth. And even discounting things like that, your own studio is going to become more skilled, right? And this is especially true for newer studios or even older studios, because the team begins to mesh together better, and that leads to better productions. And that's just how it is, folks. Anyways, I think that's just about it for this part. third part, we're going to finish things off, and I'm also going to, of course, give my thoughts and opinions. Hopefully that shall be up tomorrow. So with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.